Hello, great scholars. Good day to all of you. It's Mr. Alan. I'm excited to be hosting you in another science learning segment. Our unit for today is life cycle. Can I hear you echo that? Life cycle. We are learning to investigate the life cycle of some selected animals. We're also learning to investigate growth stages in humans. So we're looking at the timeline that exists from the time of birth of an organism until when it becomes mature and eventually dies. What I'm looking for in this lesson is your ability to explain what life cycle is all about in some selected animals. Secondly, is your efficiency in describing each growth stage in the human life cycle. So at the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify the growth stage in the life cycle or the timeline of an organism, including humans, and your ability to be able to explain the features or characteristics that exist in that particular stage. Moving on, what is a life cycle? So life cycle simply refers to the stages a living thing goes through from birth to death. Don't forget the characteristics of living things summarized in Mr. Ninja card, where M stands for movement, R stands for respiration, N stands for nutrition or feeding, I stands for irritability or sensitivity of stimulus or stimuli in the environment, G stands for growth, which is the irreversible increase in the size of living organisms. E stands for excretion because living things have to excrete or remove their waste product of undigested foods. Then the second R in the Mr. Ninja stands for reproduction. At each stage in one's life cycle, there's a need to replicate the individuals in that group of species so that they can stay on from one generation to another. Then we have the card. The C stands for competition. Living organisms, including plants and animals, must undergo competition in their immediate or physical environment. Then we have the A, adaptation. Plants and animals have to adapt to environmental factors or conditions in the environment in order to stay alive, as propounded by Charles Darwin in the theory of the survival of the fittest. Then the D actually stands for death. Every living organism is wired to die at a stage in their life. Okay, let's consider the life cycle of a plant. A plant actually will start its life cycle from the seed. That's for flowering plants. But for non-flowering plants, they produce spores that falls to the soil and germinates over time. So we have both flowering and non-flowering plants from your elementary science. So in the case of flowering plants, it will always start from the seed, which is planted in the soil, and it decomposes or decays and sprout out a new plant in it. Now it goes to the germination stage. You can see in the soil the seed has decomposed and the radicle is beginning to shoot out as a new plant. Then the next stage in the life cycle is the seedling stage, where you already have the shoot above the soil and the plant is growing gradually. Then it grows over time and moves to the mature plant. In this case, the life cycle will continue in that manner after the mature plant produces fruit again and the seeds are replanted from one generation to another. Now let's go to the life cycle of animals, and I selected the frog life cycle here. Now the frog is an amphibian which lives both on land and in water, but mostly found in water, especially when they need to reproduce themselves by laying their jelly-like eggs. This happens when they lay eggs in water, then it moves to the place where, or the part of water where the frog lays their eggs is called the spawn, the spawning ground. That's where it goes to lay its eggs. It's called a spawning ground because that's a place for their reproduction. They must always go back to water in order to lay their eggs, because that's what favors the growth or the viability of their eggs. So the eggs are laid in a jelly-like form, and after some days or weeks actually, it will now metamorphose into a tadpole, as you can see here. Then the tadpole over time will metamorphose into a froglet, as you can see in this picture, and eventually the froglet will grow in the environment over time by feeding on planktons in the water environment, or the aquatic environment and metamorphose into an adult frog, as you can see in this picture. So the life cycle continues because they'll keep doing this from one generation to another. In the life cycle of a toad, it undergoes different stages from the water or the spawning ground, which leads to the production of the eggs or the laying of the eggs, and the eggs over time metamorphose into a tadpole, and the tadpole actually comes in different sizes as it grows. It starts with tadpole without limbs, later tadpole with hind limbs. That hind limbs means the legs at the back. Then later it will metamorphose into a tadpole with legs, that's limbs in the fore or the forelimbs, and it grows into a froglet and eventually to a frog, and the cycle continues. Now a more detailed picture showing the life cycle of a frog. Now this is more explanatory. Eggs lay in a jelly-like or gelatinous substance in order to prevent them from being washed away by water, and they lay their eggs in hundreds or in thousands in order to give them room to be able to survive in the harsh condition of the environment. Just in case some of them don't make it, the rest will eventually make it. So the tadpole without limbs is metamorphosed from the egg, and this will metamorphose into tadpole with four limbs, as you can see here. Then later the tadpole has both fore and hind limbs in this stage because it's showing progression in growth, and it metamorphoses into an adult frog, as you can see here. And over time an adult frog mates with his partner and they lay eggs again, and the cycle continues. So now let's go to the life cycle of humans. We are humans. Humans are higher organisms in the animal kingdom. It all starts from the fusion of the male and female gametes or sex cells called spermatozoon and ovum. The plural word for spermatozoon is spermatozoa, which in English simply refers to sperm cells, while in females it is called ova as the plural of ovum, and the English name is called egg. So when eggs and sperm cells fuses together, it leads to the formation of a zygote. A zygote is the developing embryo or the fetus in the uterus or womb of the female. So the zygote over time will metamorphose into a baby. Then the baby or fetus is born and he will eventually metamorphose back to adult stage, and they reproduce and the cycle continues. In each stage there is a growth difference. They are not the same because you can't compare the spermatozoa and the ovum stage to the zygote stage where they already fuse, growing bigger into a fetus in the womb or the uterus of the female. And you can't compare the baby stage where the baby is born to the external environment and grows into an adult. So this tells us that there is a progression in growth, and growth simply refers to an irreversible increase in size of an organism. This is like a timeline in the life cycle of humans. It starts from when the baby is born after being a zygote in the uterus to a baby. Then the baby grows into a toddler, an adolescent grows into an adult, and an adult eventually grows old into this stage. So if you look at these stages of man, it is quite different from each other. Now let's do a comparison task. We're going to compare the life cycle of humans to that of a butterfly and a frog. Then we're going to identify and explain the differences we spotted. So I just want to have you look at this picture of an insect. This is the life cycle of an insect known as a monarch butterfly. Now the life cycle starts from when the adult female lays her eggs, and the egg metamorphoses into what we call the first instar larva here. Now what we mean by the first instar larva is that the instar is the changes from one stage to another. So from the egg to the first instar larva means the egg has changed into a larval stage, but at a very early larval stage. Then the first larval stage or the first instar metamorphoses into a second instar larva, which tells us that it is growing bigger and bigger. Then the second instar larva that looks like a caterpillar metamorphoses into what we call a chrysalis in a cocoon as seen here. The cocoon is a protective cover or pouch that protects the pupa so that it doesn't get harmed by the external environment or harsh weather conditions. Then it metamorphoses into a full chrysalis or pupa as the cocoon will be opened or break open to allow for more growth. Then over time, when it is out of the cocoon, it will respond to environmental changes and metamorphose into the chrysalis, or the chrysalis can also be called the pupa as in other insects, because the pupa stage is the stage that is next to the adult stage. So at the pupa stage or chrysalis stage, it begins to feed on nectars of plants and some other environmental factors, and it will metamorphose into an adult monarch butterfly, and over time it will also lay eggs again, and the cycle continues. So I want you to compare the life cycle of a human, as we saw earlier, the life cycle of a frog, and the life cycle of the insect known as the monarch butterfly. Are they the same? Note the differences in the stages. Note the terminologies used for each stage of growth or metamorphosis in their life cycle, and look at their structure. Do they look the same? Look at their complexity. Are they simple or complex in shape or in size or in structure? Then, do they have the same life cycle timeline? Like, do they live almost the same time or have the same duration of life in their immediate environment? Note all this down in your science log, and you can share with me on the Google Classroom or when we see in class. This brings me to the end of this presentation. So I want to thank you all for your audience. I'll see you in my next learning segment or science session again. It's bye for now from Zoologist Alan.